Hello, I'm Dr. Ron England, and today we're going to talk about user controls. And I really like user controls because they allow me to take pieces of code and encapsulate them and be able to reuse them. So I'll show you what I want to do here. I've got this application I'm writing, and it really right now I'm writing this template for user logins that uses my database user login system that I've designed, not necessarily the ASP.NET one. I haven't done a lot of the styles and everything, but if I put this thing together, if I run this, right now the way this whole thing works is I have this default page, and right now on the default page, if I bring it over here, it shows this this enter information to register, and it just says welcome to this application. And it actually is a functional. This by the way, this whole piece right here, even with the submit button, is a user control that is now embedded inside of the page default. And if I try to submit, it will give me, I have validators that stop it. And so I've really built this as a full-fledged user control to do a lot of stuff. But I'm going to take you through how to do a user control. And I'm going to put the user control on the same page. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some buttons that turn the user controls on and off, which will be kind of neat. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to my Solution Explorer and bring my Solution Explorer up here so you can see it. And I am going to create a new user control. So I'm going to add new item, and this time I'm going to actually create a web user control. And this user control is going to be called user login, because what it's going to be is it's going to be the password and login combination to log in to the system. So that's going to give me this. Basically looks like a source code window, just like everything else, and I'm going to, just like any source code window, only it doesn't have a lot of the things on it like a header and a body. It's just all that's going to be included within the page. Well, the first thing I'm going to do, because I've written some code that makes it a little easier to do here, I'm going to go over to my previous user control that I made, and I'm just going to steal a little chunk of code here. This ASP table, table row, table cells, and I'm going to go all the way to the end of one table row here. And what I'm doing is that login name piece that was actually in that previous, the one that I just showed you, I'm going to take all of that from this page and simply move it over here to my user login right here. Okay, so not a lot of stuff that's fancy, and I don't have the table closed, so I have to go ahead and close the ASP table. So now I actually have a full table here. If I look at the design mode, okay, I've got enter desired login name. Well, we're not going to actually make that enter desired login name. We're just going to say enter login name. Okay, that's it. So all you're going to do is enter the login name. All right. We want another row that we want to go ahead and enter the password. And I want to talk a little bit about this validator that I have. But I'm going to come down here. I'm going to just copy this entire row over to this row. And there's a few things that I've done. And now I'm kind of getting into a little bit more detail of how I like to do code. Well, first thing is that I've embedded this information within, within a table. And you can use direct CSS to format that, or you can use tables. Now, the reason I use tables is because I want to use CSS within this. So what I have is this table cell here, which actually has a CSS class called table prompt. If I go over here to style CSS, I can actually take table prompt, and now I can do anything I want to with that. Let's say I want table prompt to have a background color of aqua. Okay. Well, I just save that, and I come back over here to this piece here, and now these prompts, when I run this, will actually have that background color because I've made it that, and you'll be able to see that here in just a second. Okay, so this other, though, I'm not actually entering the login name in the second row. I'm entering the password, which means that I'm going to go to this text box. I'm going to call it TB password. Okay, and the width of 2. I've got the width set to 200, which is fine here. And now I've got this validator here. The password is required, so I usually call validators. This is a required field validator, so a lot of people like to call them RFV. Okay, and I'll actually do that. I'm going to call this first one RFV username. I'm going to call this second one RFV password because they're both required fields. I'm going to change this error message to password. And a validator, a required field validator, actually makes sure that that field is entered. You can't leave it blank or it's going to not allow you to submit. The control to submit when the password is actually TB password. That's the table. That's the name of the text box that you have here, TB. So it's going to validate whether that's entered. There's another thing I need to do with this text box, and that's going to be the text mode. It's a password, so I don't want people seeing it. So I'm going to set the text mode to password. So now I've actually got the two fields that I need here, enter login name, enter password. And the last thing I'm going to do here is that's pretty much all the information that I want here with this. The last thing that I'd like to do here is I do want a submit button. So I'm going to go ahead and pop a button onto the page. I do like to use the toolbox to drop things on because it puts the run at and the other required information in there. I'm going to call this BTN submit. And by default behavior, when you click a button, it does cost a postback. So I'm going to, so I don't have to really worry about the postback being done because the validators only execute on a postback. So the text of this is going to be submit. Okay, now there's no code behind behavior, but this is now a user control. I do want to put some code behind behavior here. So if I go to my Solution Explorer and I look at this user control that I just created, I've got the code behind. And notice you've got a page load here. I can go over here to this, go to the design mode, double click on the submit button. It's going to create a button submit click. And what do I want to do here? Well, this is a login, so I want to, if the validation works, then I want to go ahead and do that. Now, I do have one error message here. It says P is missing its, and this paragraph, I actually don't need it at all. You know, just an extraneous tag right there. I would normally, in this case, if I want a little bit of a break between the header and the table, I would just put a line break in there, which is what I'm going to do. And now, I want to go ahead and submit. What I'm submitting is the login. I want to check to see if the login is a valid login. So now, I've created this, when I go to my Solution Explorer, I've created some code things, and I use my database helper. If you haven't seen database helper, it's a bunch of methods that are very useful in connecting to a database. And I've made this connect to the database, but I also have this other class that I've made here, going to my Solution Explorer, called User Management. And User Management is specifically functions that deal with checking to see what's the user can do. Like I have this one called Does User Exist? And I'm going to demonstrate that here in a minute. And it returns a Boolean. And all it does is throw a SQL, select count star from users, where username equals the username that's passed over. And if the count is 1 or greater, then the user does exist, and you return a true, else you return a false. Well, I'm going to create another one here. It's going to be a public. I'm going to make this an actual static. Okay, and this one's going to be a Boolean. Okay, in this case, is login valid? And this is not much different from the previous one. It's going to take a string, that is the username, and it's going to take a second string, and I actually like to use the convention lowercase and then uppercase. And then I've got another one, which is a string, which will be user password. So I'm going to throw a query at the database here. Now, because I've written the code to instantiate the database helper, and I've pretty much got everything here, and it actually is a very similar function, because in this case, what I'm doing is I'm going to select two things. I'm going to find out first, is the username, does it exist? But I have a second part of the SQL. Okay. Now, what I want to do in this case, because the SQL string is a little bit longer, is I'm going to go ahead and define a string called SQL. Okay, and it's going to be equal to, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this string that's in here, okay, and I'm going to remove it, and I'll put SQL in there, and I'm going to set the first part of the string here equal to this select count star from users where username equals username. Okay, and I'm going to go one step further, and I'm going to add in a little bit more to the string, and I'm going to add end user password is equal to, and that, by the way, is the name of the field that we have for the password, and I'm going to pass over user password plus, close the quotes, and I have to close the single quotes because it actually is a SQL string. It's going to run the same thing, execute SQL return string. I've got to check to see if the value is equal to 1. If the value is equal to 1, then the login is valid. Otherwise, the login is not valid. Okay, so pretty straightforward stuff if you think about how logins work. But now I have this beautiful function isLoginValid, and I can use this. So I go back over here to my user login code. Now before I can use it, I have to go ahead and put the namespace so I can use the namespace. And the namespace was basic user template code. Okay, now I can use this piece, and I'm going to create a Boolean, and I'll call this UV, user valid, and it's going to be equal to, and remember I made it a static class, so I can call this user management dot, and there it is login valid. Now I have to pass it over the username and the user password, and that's the information that's in tb username.text. Okay, and I'm going to also pull tb password.text. Okay, now in this case, if the user is valid, well, what I really want to do in the long term here is I want to go to another page, and that's the default logged in page. Well, I don't have anything there, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to throw in some content here that says you are logged in. Okay, and that's it. We can do stuff with that later on. So let's go back over to our, because I want to show how to actually put this user control in there. And in this case, I'm just going to do a response redirect, and I'm going to redirect to the default logged in.aspx. So I've put a whole bunch of stuff in there, okay, and I'm going to do that if UV. And if it's not, okay, well, now I got to do one more thing. I'm going to go back here to this user login piece. I have this button down here. I'm going to toss a label down here underneath it, okay, and I'm going to call this label invalid, okay. Okay, I'm going to say you cannot, or let's say wrong user name and password. Okay, well, that works pretty well. Okay, so I have this label, and you know what I'm going to also do is I'm going to make that label not visible. Visible equals false. Okay, so it's not visible right now. Okay, oops, let's see, text, and let's make sure we got everything here. Label invalid, run it server, text equals wrong user and password, visible. We haven't finished this stuff up, so we have to put an else label invalid visible is equal to true. Okay, in here in the code. Okay, so we're going to actually turn that on if the user login over here, and see, this attribute must be followed by an equal sign. It is. If the value is in quotation marks, the quotations must match for fine there. Okay, so that was just one of those. It wasn't valid, but now it is valid. All right, so everything is there. Last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave this where it's at. Control save this. Now, the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the first page here where I actually have this user control, register user already. So if I'm going to use a user control, I have to put it up here and I have to register it within the page. Well, I've created the user control, so now I can go ahead and put a directive up here, register. Okay, the source of the registration is going to be, this is where I'm going to get it from. Okay, I'm going to open the quotes. Okay, I'm going to pick the URL. Okay, open quotes, pick URL. I'm going to use user controls user login. Okay. Now I have to put that tag. I have to put this in my page, and there's two pieces to do this. There's a prefix, which I'm going to say is UC, and I use that because it stands for user control. It's kind of like the ASP is a prefix. UC is also a prefix. I use UC so I know it's a user control, and the tag name will be equal to login. Or, well, yeah, login. That's all we need there. Okay, so now I've got that. Now I need to actually put this in my page, and I'm going to then actually do it just like do everything else. I do UC. Okay, I've created this. Okay, now I can actually make this. I've called it UC. It's called login. Okay, it's going to be run at equals server, just like all the other controls. I'm going to call it ID is going to be equal to UC login. Okay, and that's it. I'm going to now I'm going to do something here. I'm going to make the visible properties of both of these false. Now the last piece of thing that I'm going to do to make this works, and what I want to have happen is I want to have a button that turns one of them on and one of them off, and they go back and forth between the others. Okay, so I've got that now. Let's see, login, registered up there. Everything is registered. Now I'm going to come down here and I'm going to toss. Go to my standard toolbox right here. I'm going to toss a button right here in my form. This is going to say button register, and this is going to say register. Now I'm going to create another button right here, and it's going to be called BTN login. Okay, and I'm going to call this text login. Now if I go back over to design mode, I've got both the user controls. And notice the aqua shows up there. Okay, well, if I click the register, I want the user control dot register. Whoops, I did the wrong one. UC control register. Or sorry, it's UC user. UC register user. Make the visible equal to true. Make sure that the other one is off or invisible. Okay, visible equals false. Okay, that's what I want to do if this one is clicked. Okay, if the other one is clicked, if I go to default here and I have login and I click that one, I'm going to do exactly the same thing. Only in this case, I'm switching the false and the trues. So only one of them shows up at a time. So now if I run this, well, first thing I'll get is hopefully 3 buttons. If everything runs, so I have register and login. So if I click register, okay, there's my registration. If I try to register me, okay, well, it's going to tell me that I need these emails and stuff. I've also made it so that I check to see if I've actually got all what I want here. So if I put all the information in, and notice it actually does the password match. I have validators for all that, and I submit. Okay, I don't want to remember password. And in this case, it didn't do anything. I can go to the database and look at it now. But what's interesting is if I go to the login, whoops. Oh, you know what? If I get in this here. Setting that visible to false, so the register is there, so it actually is trying to do a post back and it can't do that. So I'm going to have to handle that specific post back in my page load to say, okay, well, if I am hitting one of these other buttons on the post back, it doesn't do anything. So here's what I have to do to make this work. If I go here and just reload this, now if I hit login, there's my login. If I hit register, okay, those are required, so the post back stops those. But what we're going to do is we're going to show how you can turn that off in the next lecture. But what I have shown here is how, because I'm at 20 minutes, so I'm trying to keep the lectures nice and concise, but you can see that I've actually created, now if I reload, okay, resend, register, oops, reload, resend, reload, resend, go here, blank. Okay, so now if I click this one, the registration comes up. If I go back, and I hit this one, the login comes up. So that's how the different user controls work, which is really nice. Oh, and this enter information register user, well, yuck. That should say log in, please. So now I'm going to polish the whole thing up and make it really pretty as I go along. But first I work on the functionality. So what I've shown here as a summary is I've looked at, actually seen a lot of things. We have created a user control. We have deployed the user control on a page. We've turned the user control visible to invisible by actually visible and true and false properties by clicking on a button. And we've also looked at some validation that went along with those different user controls. So that is a lot of information in a short period of time. Hopefully this is all useful, good programming. Hope you enjoy this.